The sirens are these relics from World War II, and I think one of the chief mediums in World War II was radio. And so I started thinking about radio drama. And when I think about radio drama, like most people, I think the first thought is towards War of the Worlds. And this was actually the very first project that I proposed to them. It was a project that actually took the orchestra outside of their protected realm of Walt Disney Concert Hall and right into the streets, with an experience that would be a two-way communication of inside and outside the hall. And I thought about the idea of these broadcasted voices, that all of those voices harmonize and create a sense of these individual sites actually merging into a whole, and that we actually eliminate this boundary of time and space in the piece, and that those various four sites merge into one concert. Annie was my first choice for this piece. I was so taken by the theatricality of her work and the inventiveness with which she brings these kind of found sounds into a more classical composition.
War of the Worlds is, I would say, a very good example of my work. It uses a lot of acoustic instruments, sometimes playing in unusual ways, coupled with electronic sounds that feature a lot of old samples of jammed radio signals.
We wanted to make sure that it wasn't, that the visual installation was purposefully artificial, so that if you're at the site, you're hearing music that's very immediate and very evocative of a terrifying alien attack. But the alien that you actually see is more like a street theater puppet.
But I think it's important to kind of rekindle the fun of doing it live in front of people so they can walk by and witness this thing happening and be a part of it. And I think it's a little more special than you see it on TV, because the fact that it's happening before your eyes is all the more real.
He was the perfect production designer to really envision bringing this piece both into the public sphere, sound performative-wise, also has an installation element.
We met and we got to test it out and start to understand exactly how it worked and how we were actually going to have performers using it. Having that live aspect really brings in a lot of just the improv, the element of that anything can happen when you're live in a show, and not just a production show on stage, but with the element of actor, singer, musicians, dancers, everything.
There's no beautiful cradle, of safety. There's no running off stage. Like you're here, and no matter what happens, the helicopters, the protests, the cops on horseback, the skaters, anything could happen.
I think at the industry we always love to do things that celebrate the city of Los Angeles, and so things that are outdoors in the city and things that feel like they're a part of the landscape here is really exciting.
LA Philharmonic was looking for some project that can bring their experience out to the public.
And this particular outreach program is available to the public free of charge at 3 separate sites.
Annie and Chris and I were brainstorming on who would be the right MC. And Annie said that her dream would be Sigourney Weaver, which of course Chris and I said, yeah, that's a dream, but that's never going to be that's never going to be realized. But we had the good fortune that Sigourney has a really extensive background in theater.
Scientists are describing it as explosions of incandescent gas originating from the planet Mars, hurtling toward us at what they're calling enormous velocity. And there's a possibility that we may have to evacuate. So actually, if you could just take a moment now to really look and see where your nearest exit is, that would make that unfortunate and highly unlikely event as efficient as possible.
So something beautiful about this production and the way that Yuval and Annie have really conceived this is that we live in such a hi-fi world, and we live in such an immediate, visual world. And the idea that actually this piece is an incredibly high-tech piece to do something that feels lo-fi, because it's a radio play, and we're leaving it as a radio play.
And I think the only way to really sell that, because we're all so used to things being edited and manipulated and special effects these days, that to go back and kind of do it the way he did and do a simulated live broadcast event, even though it's fake.
It shows how universal the subject of fake news is. It's very important to us now, and it's very much in the news, but it's been happening for decades.
And like, there's a question of, well, can we trust this? Even as a theatrically, is this really happening? And I think that brings us to some beautiful kind of conceptual points, because the piece is about fake news.
It started making me think about the connection between this 1938 broadcast and what 2017 is like. The way that information gets manufactured in our lives, that juxtaposition of the information you get from your eyes versus the information you get from your ears. Our responsibility is ultimately to decide what we think is true and what must be fake. And that's the kind of thing that I feel like is so necessary, and why this piece suddenly felt so timely.